Hey guys, welcome back. Behind me is a 2014 Toyota Rav4 customer complaint, extended crank, especially when hot. They have already installed a fuel pump, catalytic converter, mass airflow, and after I called them back, the dealership said, or they told me the dealership replaced injector number 3. So let's check this thing out. I just left it in the shop. I already have a fuel pressure gauge tapped in, hooked up, just so we can see what the fuel pressure is. Just as a note, the fuel pressure did drop to 0, which it didn't even do during my earlier testing after I shut it off. I had to get it warm to duplicate the concern, but let's go ahead and crank it and see if it has a long crank time. So very long crank time, even for just having a check valve bleed off. Normally they'll build pressure fairly quick and not have an issue. I also feel it misfiring a little bit. When I checked it for codes, it had a rich running code, P0172, a P1602, which was maybe 1604. Startability fault, meaning that it took too long to start. And then in a pending code, it had a P0303 cylinder 3 misfire. So shut it back off. Let's see what our fuel pressure is. So as you can see, we are dropping quite rapidly. But is it the fuel pump, or is it the injectors, or the fuel pressure regulator? That's what we need to find out. So quickly observing the fuel system underneath the hood, I tied into the fuel rail, but there was no return line. So this is a returnless fuel system. So that takes off the fuel pressure regulator. Now we are down to 2 possible causes. I guess there could be 3. We could have a leaking line somewhere. But the fuel pump check valve could be bad, or one of the fuel injectors is leaking. We already know that Toyota replaced 1 injector. The customer replaced the fuel pump. So which one of those parts is still bad? Did they get a defective part? Is one of the other injectors leaking? I'm tied in with a T in line, so we can't tell which part of the system is faulty right now. The way that I have my fuel tester set up is I have these Foster mini quick disconnects all over everything, so I can kind of interchange my hoses. I can test various systems. I can isolate stuff. As I look over here now, we're at almost no fuel pressure, and this is acting up way worse. Oh, my gauge might be leaking a little bit. Oh, it could be because I tipped it up. So we need to find out where our pressure is going. So I release the fuel pressure. I'm going to disconnect my gauge from this T. Might get a little bit of leakage here. And I want to tie in to just the line going to the tank. That's going to tell me if the fuel pump check valve is bad. So we are at no pressure still. I'm going to have to bump the engine over for this to build pressure. Toyota does not do it on a key cycle. You actually have to crank the engine for the circuit opening relay to activate, causing the fuel pump to pump. This one may have a little different setup, but that's the basics of it. You got to bump the key. So I'm just going to reach in, give it a bump, wait a second, give it another bump, wait a second, bump it again, just to make sure we got a couple of runs on that fuel pump. And we are bleeding off a little bit, but not nearly as fast as we were before. So it was about 50, now we're down to 45. The spec on this vehicle is 45 to 50. So we're still in range. It is slowly bleeding down, but nothing like it was before. So that means that the rest of the bleed off issue is going to be isolated to the fuel injector rail back there. The only good way of testing that, or the easiest way on this one, is just to pull the rail off. It's a couple of bolts. We have to take a few wires out of the way. I already had it off once, but I wanted to duplicate the entire scenario for you guys. So I'm going to pull that rail out real quick, and then we'll continue with the diagnosis. So I got a little bit of dirt on the end of these injectors when I pulled them out, just because the intake's a little dirty. So I'm going to spray them off real quick. Also note I have zip ties holding the injectors to the rail. The first time I pulled this out, there was about 10 pounds of pressure in it, and as soon as I loosened up the rail, it actually popped one of the injectors out of the rail because these don't have keepers on them. I don't know if they're supposed to from the factory or not, but the rail is going to hold them into the engine. I'm guessing that there is not a keeper. Since we need them to stay in the rail for the next test, I just put a zip tie around the connector portion, around the rail, just to hold them in place. So I'm going to spray these off real quick with some parts cleaner, blow them off with compressed air, and then we can find out if any of them are leaking. We want the end of the injector completely dry when we start the test, so we can find out if any of the pentals are stuck and causing fuel to leak out. So now that I did that, I have 0 pounds of pressure in the fuel system. I'm going to bump the key a few more times, get the pressure to jump back up. We'll find out if any of these are leaking. And after looking at it, the cleanest injector is number 2, so I don't know if that's the one Toyota changed out. It's really kind of hard to tell because they all look pretty good, but this one has the least amount of dirt on it around the injector body itself. So I'm guessing that they changed number 2 and not number 3. Number 3 spark plug was also kind of fouled out. So if that was from the previous injector, it still has not burnt that plug off, and we may have to replace the spark plugs. Okay, we got some issues here. Can you guys see that? Let me zoom you in. So this is acting up even worse than when I checked it earlier. This injector is just constantly dripping. Number 1 injector is constantly dripping. Number 4 injector is kind of bubbling, dripping every once in a while. These injectors are junk. As I look at injector number 2, it's a little damp, so it's leaking as well. So it doesn't matter which one that Toyota replaced, we still have a leaking injector on every single one. Number 2 is the one that's leaking the least, but I would say that we need to replace all 4 of these, and that's where our biggest issue is going to be. So what's going to happen? Is as they drive the vehicle, everything's going to be kind of okay. They're going to be leaking a little bit, not too big of an issue. Might set the rich running code. They're going to shut it off. This vehicle is used for postal delivery, so there may be times when they shut it off to fill up those big mailbox banks. I forget what they call them, but it may not start when they go to take off, and that's because, for one, it's going to be dripping all the fuel out into the engine. Fuel vapor is going to kind of go everywhere. It could temporarily flood the engine, but then, since the pressure is bleeding off, this fuel rail is probably about 150 to 200 degrees, whatever the engine temp is. It's going to cool off a little bit, but not much. It's going to cause that fuel to boil in the rail. As that pressure drops, it's going to replace the liquid fuel with vaporized fuel. And then the next time you start it up, it might still have 40 pounds of pressure in here, unless it all leaks out fairly rapidly. I mean, now we're down to 20. But the next time the key kicks on, it's going to pump fuel in here until it's at 45, 50 psi. There's no return line. There's nowhere for that fuel vapor to go. So now we have compressed fuel vapor that could be kind of airlocking the system. So now you have to crank it. You have to purge that air out of the rail before it'll start up. Now this is probably even a bigger issue in states like Colorado. You know, we are in September. We might have gas stations starting to bring in the winter blend fuel, which has a lower boiling point. But today was 100 degrees. Definitely going to be an issue. I test drove this vehicle earlier to the parts store. I didn't know if I was going to get started to get back over here. So we need to change all of these out. I almost want to drain the entire gas tank and put fresh gas in it. I guess I could just tell the customer we have to. They won't have a choice. And then probably after I fill it up, put some additive in there, maybe a can of 44K, just to clean out anything else that's in the lines. Because something is causing these injectors to stick open. Whether they're running bad fuel, it is a commercial mail vehicle, sort of commercial, they're private, rural mail route, so they may have a substandard source of fuel that's a little cheaper. They may have fuel tanks on their own facility, and something is causing these injectors to gum up and not seal once it gets hot. So that's pretty crazy that all of these are leaking. Even the one, I mean, it's barely leaking. Even the one that has been replaced is leaking fuel. So my service writer talked to the customer. They agreed, let's just do all 4 of them. They want the one injector that was that looks newest. They'll go back to Toyota, see if they can get something reimbursed on that. I mean, it's possible that I could clean these injectors and get them to quit leaking, but the fact that they don't always leak and sometimes leak, how would I know that they're going to be okay for the customer? It's hard for me to put them through the drive cycle that you'd normally do on a bench. Plus, they're not going to be the same temperature. I'm just going to go ahead and replace them, clean out the fuel system, put an additive in there, and hope for the best. They may have to start getting premium fuel from a different gas station that has maybe some of the additives in there that'll clean it out. So I don't think I'll do a repair video. You guys saw it with the rail off. If I have further issues, I will do a follow-up video, but I doubt I will. The service writer said it's going to be 2 days to get the injectors, so I'm going to have to kind of put it back together, get it outside, and I'll button it up later this week. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe and click the bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.